Good evening, everyone. Welcome to yet another round of Edelweiss Connect. As usual, we really are very thankful for all of to have logged in, registered, and looking forward to an exciting 1 hour of conversation on topic that has been very uh, discussed. Good evening, everyone, and something that everyone in our previous connects have been talking about for us to talk about. Yes, we are talking about international investing. Uh, as a country, we have been seeing migration from domestic consumption to international consumption, domestic studies to international studies, working domestically to working globally. In more ways than one, an average Indian is more global than any other citizen from any other country. When it comes to investing, that has not been the case so far. But perhaps this is a great time to look at it, look at opportunities, understand this space in more detail. Who better than our CEO Radhika Gupta to talk about it? She has been a global traveler, so to say, having worked, studied internationally for various reasons, right from her birth in Pakistan to working in New York City, and then coming back to India in 2009 to set up her own business, and in 2014 jumping into the Edelweiss bandwagon, and since then doing really well and guiding the entire asset management business to its current glory. So without further ado, let me invite Radhika Gupta, CEO and MD Edelweiss Asset Management. Welcome, Radhika.
Thank you so much, and really delighted to do another connect. As you said, Deepak, it's an on-demand connect. I think this is a topic that we get more questions about, especially over the last year than I think at least I have got in my MF career over previous years. So it's a topic that's carrying a lot of excitement. I guess as Indians become more global investing also attracts more interest. And I hope we have an interesting discussion and really simplify what is this whole space today.
So, Radhika, before we get into some kind of a discussion on the opportunities or the landscape in the international arena, what has been your, prima facie observance when you have traveled the world, when you have worked globally and you came to India? What has been your experience when it comes to Indians investing overseas?
So this is interesting, and I can probably start with personal background and then come to Indians and how they have behaved. So I lived abroad from 2005 to 2009, and before that also. And when I started earning, I lived in the US, and I think perhaps 50% of my portfolio was in the US, which was my home country of residence then, and 50% was actually outside. So 50% was home and 50% was abroad, and I invested in emerging markets, I invested in Europe, etc., etc. Then I moved back in 2009, and I was actually personally, I said, I'm living in India, so I'm going to invest in India, but I also want to invest abroad because I don't want so much home bias, so to call it. I mean, everything can't be home. As you said, we live globally, we consume globally. I mean, even today, half our consumption, I would say, is global, whether it's the phone you use or the credit card brand you use or many other technology products. And then I saw that in India, actually, the international fund industry, and you would know more than me, was very small in 2009, which means that people were not really investing that much abroad. I guess there was a lot of home bias and a feeling that Indian market is doing well, so why do I even need to invest abroad? And I found it very surprising. In fact, I started investing in international funds personally in 2011, well before I had anything to do with Edelweiss. So I think it's a trend that people are waking up to, and waking up to definitely in the last 2 years.
Also, Radhika, don't you think that India has been a control economy for a very long period of time, and things have opened up gradually? And many people may not be aware that government do allow ever since 2003 now for people to invest, take some money out globally. And in fact, from a funds perspective, it's been almost 15 years or more than 15 years since RBI have allowed a certain amount of money to be invested abroad. So no better opportunity than to talk about it, Radhika. But before we do that, let's address the first question. I mean, when we have such a great economy in India itself, and we talk about investing into equities investing into the idea of India from a long-term perspective? Why invest in offshore funds at all?
So I think, look, there are, and it's not about patriotism. I think it's about good investment case. And I think there are three good investment cases to invest abroad. One is access. Now, what does access mean? Access means that you have the opportunity to buy sectors or companies or themes that are not just available in India for whatever reason. There are many great businesses in the world. I mean, I think all of us drink Coke and Pepsi, or at least the less health conscious ones of us drink Coke and Pepsi. These are global brands. I think much of the technology that all of us use is not represented in the Indian market. I mean, the fact that we're doing this over Zoom, which is incidentally larger than Goldman Sachs, I mean, these are the kind of companies that are available abroad. And we can talk about lots of themes and ideas later in the conversation. But the fact is, many of the world's best businesses are just not listed in India. And doing it sometimes directly is not easy. So there has to be a way. Just because you're sitting in India, you're consuming these businesses, it doesn't mean you can't invest in them. I mean, if they're good enough to consume, there must be a great investment case for them. The second is, I think, the simple and most important reason of diversification. Now, you mentioned India is a great home market. I don't dispute that at all. But India is not always the best market. I think you've pulled up a slide there. And if I could ask the audience to just look at this, this is a slightly busy slide, but I think it's a good one. This just shows calendar year wise different markets and their calendar year return performance. So if I were to take 2019, for instance, Taiwan delivered 37%. It was the best performing market that year. India was incidentally the worst performing market, 7.6. If I were to take a year like 2012 on this screen, India was the best performing market at 26%. Japan was the worst. I think what you see when you look at this is that India's role on the map keeps changing. I mean, it's up, it's down, and not just India, any country keeps changing. Just like in India, we say do debt and equity because different asset classes do well at different points in times. Well, different countries do well at different points in time for their own geopolitical and economic reasons. And that is why diversification is important. I think, in fact, if you look at the best performing market on this chart over the last 10 years, that has been the US market. And that's not a prediction for the future. But if you just look at investing in India versus investing in the US, India and US don't move in sync. They are actually, as we call it in finance, not very correlated. The relationship between India and US is relatively weak. And it makes sense because the US economy is comprised of very different businesses than perhaps the Indian economy. So there are times when the US will do phenomenally and India will not do so well. And there are times vice versa. So adding different countries to your portfolio, I think, improves diversification. And I think the last reason for investing abroad is, of course, the currency. Now, everything said and done, India is a depreciating currency. If you look at the data in front of you, and we can argue, does the currency depreciate or not? But I mean, just look at historical facts. And I think this is something that we can carry forward into the future. The rupee depreciates at about 3 to 5% a year, on average 4%. When you are investing abroad, you are investing in a foreign currency, so you earn the benefits of rupee depreciation. So I was educated abroad, incidentally, and I went to college abroad, and college education is getting more expensive abroad. But more than that, the USD INR has gotten worse. I think when I went to college, and this makes me sound old, the rupee was probably at 45, now it's at 73. So that $200,000 education actually becomes a $400,000 education. And this is something that we live with. This is one way for you to hedge against that risk. So I would summarize it as three things: access, diversification, and currency.
So Radhika, that's a great reason for people to invest. But when you talk about access, what are the kind of opportunities that an Indian investor has in terms of how can he invest or she invest? If you can throw some light on that, what are the ways and means through which one can invest in global stocks and global markets?
So I think there are broadly two. One is the LRS route. RBI has got this liberalized remittance scheme, and I think they've got a $125,000 limit. And you can open a brokerage account abroad. You can transfer that money abroad, and via that account, you can buy stocks, etc., directly. This is a legitimate way. The only challenge is obviously, it involves setting up these accounts abroad, and it involves stock picking. Now, it is hard enough, at least for someone like me, to manage a direct portfolio of Indian stocks. I don't do that. But to try and track a portfolio of 50 global companies is a pretty tough exercise, I would say, especially around the world, because you can't track so many markets. I mean, it is really, really tough. The second way, of course, is the offshore mutual fund route. Many asset management companies, including us, offer these offshore funds. And offshore funds are essentially funds that invest abroad. They take lots of different colors. So they can be active in nature, they can be passive in nature. The AMC could be managing them directly, or it could be working with a partner AMC, like we work with JP Morgan, which is a large global asset manager, and they buy these funds. So there are multiple ways that this is done, but essentially you take money like an Indian investor, just as you invest in domestic equity funds, you invest in this category called international equity funds.
So just to summarize, one can invest directly on their own via the LRS route, or one can invest in mutual funds like they invest in India and be rest assured that their money will be managed in the similar fashion. So we'll come back to that, Radhika, and talk about the nuances of investing through fund of fund, which you mentioned a little later. But so just to summarize, if you were to simplify this entire gamut of investing globally, I mean, it's tough enough for people to look at Indian funds and 40 AMCs and then 40 categories. I mean, many of those categories, none of us remember. But how one can make a mental map or classification when it comes to global investing? Can you simplify that for our audience so that it's easier for people to declutter the entire space?
Yeah, I think good question. I mean, on a lighter note, there are probably 180 countries in the world, but given the number of domestic schemes we have, there are less international schemes that people have to choose from and less AMCs. So thankfully, that makes your life easier. I think there are a few ways to bucket this. You can look at three things. You can look at country-specific funds, so funds that will invest in the US or the UK or China or whatever country. There's no Pakistan fund where I was born, but essentially one of these country-specific funds, and they usually invest in a major market in the world. So that's one. The second is you can look at region-specific funds. Region-specific funds, as the name suggests, club a region or kind of region. So for instance, emerging markets is a category that we and a couple of others run that invests in various large emerging markets. ASEAN is another category. Europe is another very, very logical category. There is also something called world funds, that has its own challenges, up and down challenges, but there are also global funds. So you can have regions, continents, or sort of global funds. And then the third category is what I would call funds that play a specific theme, and they can play a theme in the market or they can play a theme broadly. So you could have a fund focused on brands. You could have a fund focused on healthcare. For instance, we do an Indo-Global Healthcare Fund. You could have a fund focused on technology, do a technology fund. So these are various ways. So I would bucket it as country funds, region funds, and theme funds. And I think if you have this bucketing in your head, it then makes it easier to do your choosing, just like large cap, mid cap, multi cap does.
So why don't you just give some example of some of these things? So you mentioned the two broad categories could be geographical access, and the other category could be thematic access. So if you can give us, our audience, one flavor of each on a live basis, it'll be really useful for all of us.
Okay, so if I were to give you an idea of a geography-focused fund, an emerging markets fund is a geography-focused fund. The largest emerging markets in the world, India, China, Russia, Brazil, etc., etc. I mean, these seven account for, I mean, if you compare them to developed markets, they're actually not very far apart. So emerging markets is a classic region-focused fund. Let me give you an example of a couple of relevant theme-focused funds, since you asked that question. I think there are many themes when we discussed access, Deepak, that are not present in the Indian market. I'll give you 2-3 examples. One is healthcare. Healthcare is obviously the big buzzword. India is a major healthcare market. We are the pharmacy to the rest of the world. We are a big generics market. We consume a lot. But everyone knows in terms of patent filing, leading biotech research, leading vaccine research, for instance, it is driven by developed markets, especially the US, which is why we did an Indo-Global Healthcare Fund. But healthcare is one theme where global access, I think, would be really powerful. Technology is another theme. If you look at our IT, India, if you look at Nifty, it has companies like Infosys and Wipro and HCL, but none of these are really, cutting edge technology. They're not doing 5G and cloud and all these things. They're essentially IT services companies. We are a back office to the world in some sense. So if you want to look at technology and really break through technology, and everybody knows what COVID has done to accelerate technology, really the market you have to look at is US, and which is why something like a US Tech or any of these funds would be relevant. Another third one, and there's no fund that comes to mind right now, is this whole space of financial technology. Now, India in finance, India is really banks. But there isn't very much going on. We don't have many listed, like Paytm is not listed here, right? None of the big credit card companies come out of India. So some of those themes also exist. So that's just a quick lay of the land, and it gives you a sense of what is out there in terms of themes.
So Radhika, the belief among Indian masses, for wrong or right reasons, have been that global investment could be very risky, returns may not be as good as India. But how would you like to describe the risk reward matrix as far as global investing is concerned? And if you could throw some light, some examples on both sides, both risk and rewards.
So I think, firstly, as you rightly said, risk and reward. And, some of the challenge with global markets, I feel, especially since they've done well, and it is important to talk about risks and invest responsibly, is that people forget that this is equity. Whether you are buying Brazilian equity or Indian equity or US equity or Chinese equity, you are buying equity. And I don't think anyone should ever forget that. So the same rules that we apply to large cap and mid cap investing apply to US technology investing, which is it can be very, very volatile. In fact, thematic funds there or here will be very volatile. You have to invest for the long term. You have to do it as per your asset allocation. And you have to invest an amount that is comfortable for you. So please keep that in mind. Now, I think are international funds riskier or less risky? I think it depends on the theme. Developed markets tend to be less volatile than emerging markets. Sectoral themes tend to be more volatile than diversified themes. I think these are a few things to keep in mind.
Isn't it like large cap versus mid cap, sector versus diversified consideration that we follow in India? Similar, and when you talk about cluster of countries, the risk is mitigated by investing into multiple countries. I mean, when we are investing into India, that single specific country risk remains. So this is a myth which has to be busted.
Yeah, and you're right. The risk in India, I mean, in fact, factually, Deepak, if you look at the numbers of investing in India versus investing in the US, and you look at the actual volatility, if you actually measure it and do this database, it will be the same. They're both countries, they're both equity, they will both have risk. Now, the more diversified you get, the more countries you have, the more the risk will come down. If you focus on a specific theme, even in India, if you focus on a thematic fund, it will tend to be more risky. I think the other thing you should keep in mind with an international market is India mein kya hota hai na, we know the Indian market, right? We read the news, we know the politics, we follow stuff on Twitter, etc. When you invest in an international market, you know a little bit less about that market. All of us have heard of Apple and Tesla, but maybe you've heard of Alibaba, but I tell you about a Chinese biotech company and chances are you would have not heard about it. So that lack of knowledge sometimes is a little bit of a risk. There is geopolitical risk. So you have to keep that in mind. I think the way to mitigate it is asset allocation and really holding for the long term.
So this really makes me come to my next question, Radhika. I mean, you mentioned about the fear of the bias of familiarity versus the fear of unknown. So how does one invest in the sense that what should be selection process of investing into global funds? Let's say we only talk about global funds at this point in time.
So I think within your asset allocation, you have to evaluate each global fund on its merit. And I think don't fall for the thing that passive acha hai, active acha hai. There are no rules. I think there are good funds and there are bad funds. I think just like you look at India funds, and I think you will hear me and Deepak repeat this theme that investing is investing, right? Look for funds with long track record. it is very important in an active fund to know the fund management capability. And ultimately, you're handing over money to the asset manager. If it is an India manager managing the active funds, you have to see their capability. If it is a global manager, I mean, as I said, we partner with JP Morgan for this reason. You have to see their capability, what kind of team they have, how long has the fund been around. Some of these funds have 10, 15 years of track record. Some of these funds, while the India feeder may not be as huge, the global funds are in billions and billions. So that is also worth looking at. If you are ever looking at any passive products on this side, you should look at whatever you would look at for an India passive product. What is the benchmark? Who is the index providers? It's someone reputed like S&P or MSCI or someone like that. What is the tracking error? These are the kinds, what is the cost? These are the kinds of things that you would want to look at. So it's just like evaluating a India product. And finally, I think you should have a careful look at the markets you want to invest in. You don't want to go very esoteric and invest in a West African frontier fund.
That's great, Radhika. I was again about to come to my next question, and your last point is a hint to that next question. How does Edelweiss come into the picture? So why don't you give us some kind of a sneak peek into the boardroom discussion on some of these ideas? How do you pick these ideas? The global partnership that you mentioned, JP Morgan and MSCI, what is the entire process or thought process behind selecting or not selecting a fund and then bringing it to domestic investors?
So I think for us, we have been very old players in this space. Actually, when we took over the JP Morgan business in 2016-17, we got a bouquet of 5 funds. We now have 6 funds in partnership with JP Morgan. A lot of people ask me why the partnership with JP Morgan. I think on active funds, active management of some of these countries is difficult and it requires serious expertise. When you're looking at themes like China or themes like technology, you really need country-specific specialists. For instance, I think on the tech side, JP Morgan probably has 10 people dedicated covering the fund because it is technology. I mean, it's serious, difficult stuff. So that's why we partner with JP Morgan, one of the world's largest asset managers. And I think now we cover with the JP Morgan partnership about 80% of the world. 5 are more region or country-specific funds, and then US Tech is a theme-based fund. We also decided to make a foray in the passive space to offer some ideas that you could not get. So on the passive space, I think the index provider is very important, which is why we've been the first to partner with MSCI, the world's largest index provider, and that is in Indo-global offering. So that's what we do on the passive side. And on the active side, we work with JP Morgan. And the idea is, look, we don't want to launch too many of these funds, but we want to give you everything in the basket. And most importantly, whatever is out there has to be managed by a quality team to the best of the ability. I think one of the things that I love, for instance, is that China has a 10-year track record now. I mean, it is an old standing fund. And we have invested in this business long before it became very popular. I mean, we've seen this whole business I think, Deepak, when you joined, it was a tiny business. So we've invested in this because we've always believed that this is a part of the asset allocation.
So Radhika, before we, I take you to, talk about some of your more popular products currently, what are the some good advice, sound, solid advice that you would like to give to our investors and distributors alike about things that you should not be doing while selecting any fund for that matter, and especially international funds?
So I think the first advice I would give someone is buy this category for the right reasons. There are right reasons to invest in something, then there are wrong reasons. The wrong reason to buy this is a few. First wrong reason to buy it is because the category is done very, very well recently. If you look at 2020 returns, and Deepak, you and I and many of our funds, we almost get scared to show the 1-year performance of these funds, thinking that people will say, oh, next year I'm going to get 80% because US Tech delivered me 80%. Please, past performance is still not indicative of future returns. That disclaimer still applies here. So don't don't invest because it's done well. I can't re-emphasize that enough. Also, don't think that, if you look at some of these countries like NASDAQ, etc., they've done very well for 10 years. They still carry risk. Risk is still there. It is still equity risk. So I think that is important. So don't get carried away. Thirdly, I would say international funds are to invest in after you've done your basic debt, equity, BAF kind of asset allocation, right? choose markets and make sure you invest the amount you can chew. You don't have to rush to dump in 40% of your portfolio into international funds. It is okay to start at 10%, experience some downside, feel comfortable with it, and then start investing. And then, of course, please do all your due diligence on the fund and asset manager.
So in short, buy, chew, digest, and not necessarily go for the whole hog. Great, Radhika. So let me dive into a couple of funds which have been talked about for both the reasons, for right and wrong reasons, for because of the fact that these do present unique opportunities, and they've also the other funds which have done very, very well recently. So let me talk about first about US Technology Fund. This is a fund that you guys launched only 11 months ago. Why did you do so? And why should one be considering this fund from a long-term perspective?
Okay, so US Tech, yes, is a fund that we launched in March, although it's a much older fund in the JP Morgan ambit. Now, I think, and we got a little lucky or, got smart about the timing, but I think technology is a theme that is undisputable. As I said, if you look at the Indian context and if you look at technology in India, it has largely been IT services. But if you look at the 6 themes that you have put out there on the screen, Deepak, these are 6 themes that are changing the way the world works. And I don't think technology is a sector. Technology is a theme that is changing the way cars work, it is changing entertainment, it is changing financial services. So if you look at something like cloud, for instance, in Edelweiss Mutual Fund itself, we are migrating everything to cloud. Most businesses are really focusing on data and analytics, and artificial intelligence and machine learning are a big part of it. Anyone who's on Twitter and follows Elon Musk or even doesn't knows what's happening with Tesla. So I don't need to talk about autonomous cars. Electronic payments, of course, in India, post demonetization and world over, electronic payments have become the big norm. In India, these companies are not listed, but it is a big space. We know what has kept us busy in the lockdown, and that's watching Netflix and Amazon. Again, these companies are not listed. That's over the top streaming. And then 5G. So I think these are 6 opportunities that the fund is trying to present. Obviously, with COVID, this theme has got tremendous tailwinds. And if you've seen the last 2-3 quarters, you are reflecting that in the earnings growth of these companies. The other reason I think we launched this fund, it is very different from your traditional NASDAQ and other kinds of funds in that it is a diversified technology fund. So I think technology has something called an S-curve. And there are 3 phases in that S-curve. Yeah, thanks. There is mature technology. This is technology that has been penetrated all through. So your tablet, your smartphone, your PC, it's mature market penetration. There's no room for exponential growth in the PC business, right? And then there's the other side of the curve, which is stuff that is still finding water. So I think your crypto and Bitcoin, etc., find stuff here. We're not doing either sides. We're trying to do technologies which are proven and yet are taking off. So OTT, cloud, electronic, all fall in this. Obviously, some things will graduate to mature and new things will come in. But the idea is to identify themes in this part of the curve. And the good thing is this is not a very concentrated fund. So this is not a FANG fund. It's not 5-6 stocks. It is, if you look at the largest position in this fund, it's probably 3-4% because technology fundamentally is risky. So that's what really this theme is about in a quick cinch.
So, I mean, traditionally we have understood technology to be IT, and this is clearly not IT. This is clearly not smartphone. This is clearly not, tablets of the world. But I mean, don't we run the risk of entering some technologies which are at very, very early stage? So do you have some kind of a process of entry and exits or some barometer in mind in terms of what do you choose and what do you not choose?
Yeah. And it is important, as I said, not to pick technologies that are too early in the stage of the cycle. So you need funds where the technology is definitely disruptive for sure. It is a large addressable market. So it is not a very, very niche market. And there is some progression along the S-curve. So that is very, very important in a fund like this, that the market is large. It's not very, very niche, yet it is disruptive.
Thanks, Radhika. We'll do a deep dive on US Technology Fund if there is a need. But one more fund, and I mean, let me let me assure audience, we are not talking about the politics of it or anything other than that. We are only talking about economic opportunities. The Greater China Fund. So how would you like to describe the Greater China Fund? What are the opportunities? And how should one look at Greater China as a theme?
Yeah, so firstly, I would reiterate the point Deepak made. I think both of us are deeply patriotic individuals, but one should not confuse patriotism and technology. So I think China, of course, there's no question about China's potential as a market. Like India, it is one of the largest consumer markets in the world. Now, China is a little interesting because if you go to, and I went to China a few years ago. If you look at sort of the economic growth in China and the infrastructure growth in China, it is far better than India. I mean, you walk Chinese cities and you talk about their infrastructure, and you'll feel very bad about the shape of Bombay and Bangalore, and maybe less about Delhi. However, despite this infrastructural and economic boom, for a long time, you actually haven't seen delivery of returns in the Chinese market. There is a structural reason for that. And that is that the fact is that for offshore investors like us in the Chinese market, the universe of companies that you could invest in had been state-owned. So it is like in India, investing largely in state-owned companies. I mean, they were doing a great job building national infrastructure, but there was no ROE because they are state-owned companies. This is changing with the opening of A-shares. The investable universe for foreign investors in China is expanding, and private sector companies in the Shanghai market are now open to offshore investors. So now investing in China is actually very similar to investing in India, and that's really the thesis. And I think if you look at the themes available in the Chinese market, and Deepak, if you could go to that slide, they will not surprise you. They look like the themes available in the Indian context. So technology and innovation, I mean, everybody knows the Alibaba stories, the kind of numbers that they do in a single day of sales. So it is a large e-commerce conglomerate. Tencent again would fall in the same category. Healthcare, just like we talk about India being a large healthcare market, Wuxi Biologics, which is a company I was trying to remember, is one of the largest healthcare companies in the world. You have some of the largest hospital chains in the world. We talked about technology. In fact, China doesn't allow global technology companies to be present in India, in their market, unlike India. So technology is a big opportunity. And then finally, consumption. So you have companies like Shanghai International Airport. So in short, I think big economy, big market, investing now becoming like India, where investors can start to see returns. And I think just one more point on China that is interesting topically is, obviously, we don't love China for the coronavirus, but it is also the first economy that is coming out of the COVID virus. So it is likely to lead the economic recovery coming out of COVID.
You must be prepared to be trolled, Radhika. You just said that investing in China is like India. So watch out.
No, God.
We also spoke about emerging market as a theme, Radhika. I mean,
yes.
Where would you place emerging market opportunity in an overall context of global investing?
Okay, so I think if you look at now, emerging markets is a contra theme, and I think probably if you look at most global asset managers, and FT had a great article on this, they are talking about the emerging market opportunity. The last decade has clearly been the decade of developed markets. That is likely to change, and there are a couple of reasons. Firstly, as I said, if you look at the top 7 emerging market economies and compare them to the big 7 developed market economies, there is some parity there. The second thing is that, the world is sitting at historically low levels of negative or no interest rates, and capital flows are likely to chase emerging markets. This is also a time when you will see a weakening dollar, and a weakening dollar traditionally means that FIIs, it makes sense for them to invest in emerging markets. Emerging markets and their presence in spaces like, I think emerging markets now account for about 30% of global manufacturing also. They account for a significant portion of global consumption. So that is the thesis behind emerging markets. And we're very happy that we have a fund that covers most of the major emerging market economies. Don't know if you have the countries it covers here, but we're very happy that we have a fund that covers most of the major emerging market economies. So while you are invested in India, this could be another diversification play. And as we said, it's a regional fund, so it covers all the regions.
So, Radhika, if you look at the performance snapshot, which is in rupee terms, uh, for good or bad reasons, most of these funds seems to have done really well, even when compared to Indian market. So the opportunity seems to be clearly large and ripe for taking. This is a question which comes often in any such discussion. Uh, how much should we invest? Should we be investing into some of these funds, and how should we look at this question first in our own minds, and then perhaps taking it forward?
Well, firstly, this is a great place to involve a financial advisor. So I just want to highlight that, as part of your asset allocation. Now, again, you're investing in emerging market equities. So it is like investing in Indian equities. If I told you how much mid-cap allocation to have, you would probably have a framework to find that answer. So if you are investing in equities, a part of that portfolio, in my view, should be international investing. Whether it is 30 or 40% or 20% is a function of your risk appetite. I want to come back to one thing we did say earlier on this topic, which is, and I forgot the nice catch line you had about chewing and biting, but I'm not getting that. But the point I wanted to make is you don't have to jump in 40.
It's bite, chew, and digest.
Yeah, exactly. So bite, chew, and digest. I think bite, chew, and digest is the way to play this. You don't, even if you want your long-term allocation, if you have 100 rupees and 80 is in domestic equities or total equities as a part of your asset allocation, and you hypothetically want ki 50-50 hona chahiye, 40 India, 40 overseas, you don't have to do the 40 overseas in one go. You can do this gradually. I also want to say that this is a great category, just like we look at Indian equities for SIPs and STPs, Deepak. There is no reason you can't do SIPs and STPs in this category. In fact, in my own portfolio, I do SIPs into BAFs and domestic equity funds, but I also do it into categories like this.
So, Radhika, we'll start taking some questions from our audience who have been waiting patiently and hearing us out.
Yes.
And the questions are, from we are going to take all kinds of questions, basic or much more informed one. There is no good or bad question. So the first question is, has Indian government given permission to individuals to invest globally?
So you can, as I said, and I think we covered this, but let's reiterate and please chime in, Deepak. You can invest globally via the LRS scheme. So you can send money abroad. I think it's $125,000. You need to set up your accounts abroad, and there you can buy direct equities. I think there are a couple of companies also, in India setting this up as a business. And obviously all Indian investors can invest abroad via the offshore fund route. So these two routes are legally available by the Indian government for you.
So fantastic, Radhika. LRS route is a very easy route to invest, just that you need to get a broker and open an account, and then you can convert your money. And per annum, Radhika, it was 125. They've just enhanced it to 150. So $150,000, which is almost a crore of rupee, which is, if you were to invest domestically also that much of money, that will keep you in good stead. So what is the best international fund? And I don't need you to answer that question. I need you to answer the psyche behind this question and how should we play it?
So it's like asking me what is the best mutual fund, right? And I don't think there is a best mutual fund. I think there are good mutual funds that are right for you. It's like, what is the best wife, right? You find a wife or a husband and hopefully they are right for you. And by the way, if you marry someone and you find a better wife along, you find a better girl, you don't go change your wife. So sorry, on a lighter note, I just wanted to say that. So the best fund is a little tricky. I think the way you should think about it is look at markets and look at your asset allocation. Again, sorry to hark on that word. You have India. Maybe you want to add something from developed market exposure. Maybe you want to add some emerging market exposure. Maybe you want to look at some thematic exposure. So just like you build a basket of Indian funds, you build a basket of international funds. And I would repeat, the same things that you look at to judge a mutual fund in India, you should look abroad. Quality of investment team, quality of the asset management company, how long the track record of the fund is. These are all important considerations.
That's great, Radhika. So there is a question with regards to US investing. People, I think the context is last 10, 12 years of, sustained rally in US markets. So the question is, for how long one should be invested in US market?
Okay, so this is a tricky question to answer. Obviously, the US markets have had a golden run, especially the technology side of the markets. Is that run likely to continue? I don't think anyone can predict markets. I think structurally, US funds or something US related is a good part of your asset allocation. But again, I think, trying to time that is a very, very difficult thing. I think having a US fund in your portfolio, whether thematic or national, is a good thing to have. And again, how long you invest? You should have a 5-7 year horizon when you're investing in equity. It's not a 1 year product in any case. A US fund is also a great fund to have an SIP into, because it's not tactical idea. It's an all-weather idea.
It's like doing business in India and globally both. You don't say that you do global business only for 2 years and India business for perpetuity. Yeah. I mean, if you become global, you become global.
Exactly.
So that's the way it is. There's a basic question, Radhika. Let me take that. This question is on what exactly is the vehicle of domestic feeder fund and how does it work, and is it more expensive to invest through the fund? So let me answer this in very simple terms. The first choice that you have, you can either buy funds directly or stocks directly through the LRS route. But if you find it difficult in navigating through the entire exercise, you can choose to invest in the funds which are available domestically. When I say the funds which are available domestically, so let's say Edelweiss Asset Management Company launches a fund, which then feeds into the mother fund, the original fund, which is being managed by JP Morgan in this case, or could be some other asset management company, depending upon the fund house that you choose. We work mostly with JP Morgan, funds. So for example, if you want to invest in US value fund, JP Morgan's US value fund, you can invest into Edelweiss US value fund, which in turns invest into JP Morgan funds. The collective expense ratio is regulated by SEBI, both of the underlying fund and of the fund that takes money, that is the Edelweiss fund, and it is capped at 2.25%. So this is like similar to equity investing and any other form of which in turns invest into whether domestic market or global market. Radhika, there is another question with regards to quantum of investment and its timing. Should it be a fixed asset allocation, or should we be changing asset allocation from time to time? And what should be our triggers for that decision?
So I don't like to mess around with asset allocation. Whether you asked me this question about Indian equities or global equities, I would have given you the same answer. I think you should carve a portion of your asset allocation to international funds, and you can maybe split them into developed and emerging, etc., and do it that way, and keep that asset allocation reasonably fixed. Asset allocation tends to work when you stick to it. If you try to time US fund saying abhi international ne bahut hi acha kiya hai, kar lete hain, baad mein nikal dete hain, I don't think this is tactical allocation. I think this is a part of your core allocation. If you are a believer of core and satellite, I think this is some part of your core allocation. 5 to 10% timing everybody wants to do in life. You can do that in life. For instance, if you believe that emerging markets are structurally undervalued, they haven't done well, maybe that is one trigger to look at that.
Okay, Radhika. The next question comes from an investor. Hi, Radhika and Deepak. Thank you very much for an informative webinar. Being an NRI, I'm a global investor, but also just started investing internationally in my rupee portfolio as well through SIP. My question is, given significant run-up in valuations globally, what would be your advice to new investors? Emerging versus developed, diversified versus technology, and will you advise more than one international fund at a time?
Oh, that's a lot of questions, not one question. I'll try to catch some of these, and maybe if I've forgotten any, Deepak, you can add. I try to keep in my own portfolio one emerging product and one developed product. Now, it could be China and the US, it could be emerging plus US, but one developed and one emerging product. I think which products you pick. So do I advise more than one? Yeah, I definitely advise one developed, one emerging. I think that is a good framework to have. I think developed markets, of course, have run up substantially. I cannot again predict whether they will continue to do well or run up. And I don't think the last year can anchor your expectations. We've generally told people that in terms of our developed market funds, this is a good time to do STPs. In terms of emerging markets, I think we've been saying that, that category has been relatively undervalued. So that is my quick take on this. Deepak, would you want to add anything?
No, I think you have covered everything. The next question is with regards to two funds that we covered, Radhika, China and emerging market. The question is that whether one should look at China specific fund and it being more risky, or whether one should look at emerging market fund, which also would have some exposure or large exposure to China. MSCI emerging market index have almost 45-50% exposure to China. So which one to take, and how do you contrast and compare?
So I think this is a question of seeing, and they are both related funds. That's correct, because emerging markets will have some component, a significant component of China, some component of India, and some of other markets. I would go back to what Deepak said at the beginning of the webinar, right? If you take single country, it is single country. Obviously, then it is China specific, and you will get larger exposure to China. Emerging markets, obviously, because you are diversifying across countries, will be a little less volatile. Risk returns in China will have a better profile, but emerging markets will be less volatile. That would be my quick take on it. Emerging markets, of course, because you have 7 different countries, so 7, 8 major countries, will carry some of the country specific risk.
So this is a question with regards to one of our international fund. The question is, and concern is, that your US values fund seems to be not doing well. What could be the rationale and reason behind it? And Radhika, I think in this context you may want to answer value versus growth, last decade. How has it played out?
Yeah, and I think that's exactly it, right? We run 2 US products. One is a growth product, which is your technology product. It's thematic, but it's ultimately growth. And there is a value fund, which is really focused on undervalued companies. Now, world over, value has had a terrible run. This is not just in the US. This is in India as well. And that's why that fund has had a less glorious run, significantly less glorious run than technology. So it's not a fund specific issue. It is a thematic issue. It is a value oriented fund, and value funds across the world have had a tough run because the theme has had a tough run. If there is a recovery in value as a theme, you will see a recovery in the fund. And that's why we offer investors actually both products, Deepak, a value product and a growth product.
Fantastic, Radhika. This is an interesting question. And you mentioned, Radhika, that the coming decade could be for the emerging market. The last has been for US particularly. How does this impact the US technology fund, which according to the person concerned is a developed market fund? So would you like to talk about the question per se and also bust some myth here?
Yeah. So firstly, I think if you look at a US technology fund, and I mean, who is the largest consumer, Deepak, of WhatsApp in the world?
I think India, China, or India.
Yeah, I could probably make that statement about many of the technology companies. So I think when you look at technology companies, they are headquartered out of US, but a lot of their consumers are emerging markets. So I think the largest beneficiaries of technology consumption will probably be emerging markets. So I think you have to look at things with a slightly more, and I think that's what Deepak was alluding to, slightly more nuanced lens. Obviously, emerging markets has been an underperforming theme, but if you look at technology as a segment, it's not just catering to US companies, it is catering worldwide. US
Thank you, Radhika.
This is not a country-focused fund, it is a theme-focused fund. That is the critical thing to remember.
Absolutely. The portfolio companies also have Alibaba and Tencent of the world. Yeah. So great. So this question is with regards to taxation, and this keeps coming. So yes. Let me take this question. What is the taxation of international fund? The taxation in the mutual fund space is very simple. You get equity taxation for funds which have minimum 65% exposure to domestic Indian equities. All other funds are treated similarly. So whether you invest in domestic, fund of fund, international feeder fund, you invest in domestic fixed income fund, they are treated like long-term capital gains. After 3 years, you get benefit of indexation. And in general, if you were to invest for 3 to 5 years, whether it's domestic equity versus international equity or any other instrument, the tax range would be anywhere between 12 to 15%. The taxation on domestic equity funds is 10% plus surcharge, etc. When you look at indexation benefits, this number for either debt funds or global funds come to roughly about 14-15%. The tax rate is 20% post indexation. So post indexation, these numbers come a little lower. So the taxation is similar to any other Indian mutual fund which does not get classification of domestic equity fund. It's very, very simple. Uh, the next question is basically coming from the currency point of view. Do we hedge? Is it important to consider? And what has been the track record as far as global funds based out of India is concerned in terms of currency risk?
So I don't think any fund in India, in my knowledge, not just Edelweiss, does currency hedging. Currency hedging is actually, Deepak, quite expensive. If you look at the cost of currency hedging, I reckon it is about 6 odd percent, 7 odd percent per year. If you look at the currency depreciation, that is about 4%. So the economics of currency hedging are not great. I actually think it is very good for investors, and we talked about this, that the funds are not currency hedged because so much your income is in Indian rupees. 70-80% of your investments are in Indian rupees. The Indian rupee is damn depreciating, and at least you have 20% of your portfolio that is hedged against the problems of the Indian rupee. So I actually think, and the fact is, you will have expenses. I mean, you're not good. Your life is not a cave in India, right? You may send a kid abroad. You will definitely travel abroad. You will have expenses abroad. All of us will have dollar expenses. So I actually don't think there's a case for hedging, and I don't think Indian asset managers should be the ones taking timing on when the currency is going to do well and not do well. I think we can rely on evidence from the past, but I don't think we are ones to time the currency.
Thanks, Radhika. This next question comes with regards to competition versus complementary question. Whether a fund in your portfolio, international fund in your portfolio, is competing against your existing domestic funds, or is it complementing your domestic basket? How would you like to put it?
I absolutely think it's a complement. I don't think a China fund can compete with a balanced advantage or mid cap fund. I think the idea is for us as AMCs to give you different options: domestic equity options, domestic fixed income options, international options. And hopefully within our basket domestically and overseas, you find enough options. So I very much think it's a complementing fund. In fact, if you take some of our funds, like if you take a mid cap fund and a tech fund and bridge them together, you'll get a do a simple experiment. We did this with two funds. You take 100% mid cap fund and 100% US tech fund, and both of them are volatile, but actually they're not very correlated to each other. So if you took 80 rupees in mid cap fund and added 20 rupees of, say, US tech or China, what you will find is that the portfolio return will probably go up, but the risk of the portfolio will very much go down. So I think if you take these two funds and push them together, you'll actually get a better portfolio. They're very much complementary.
So Radhika, this question is with regards to current account surplus and US dollar. With CAD being in surplus, do you think US dollar appreciation still vis-a-vis rupee? And yeah, that's about it.
Okay, so again, we don't take a view on the currency, but at least as Edelweiss, our house view so far has been that you are likely to see a depreciation of the dollar, especially given all the printing that is going to go around. And in light of a dollar depreciation, perhaps it is a good thing for emerging market currencies, because it just makes a lot of sense for FII money to come into emerging markets if the dollar is weakening.
But don't you think, Radhika, it's also to do with one currency versus another? US dollar in general may depreciate, but vis-a-vis INR, which is already an appreciated currency vis-a-vis USD, our currency may still depreciate for some more time because we also follow a large amount of fiscal deficit.
We do. And it is very currency specific. I'm giving you a general answer, but how USD one does versus USD and INR, you're right.
So is there a global fund in the offering from Edelweiss table is a question.
Look, I think we offer everything in terms of components, and we rather you put them together. I'm never going to say never. We've historically found that if you look at an index like MSCI World, which is the benchmark global index, the returns are very, very offer you
So with this, we come to an hour on the clock, and we have answered so many questions. There have been more than 400 participants joining in on this call from various parts of the country. I believe some of my friends have joined in. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. Yeah, Radhika, you want to say something?
No, I wanted to say hi to your friends from the school group who joined in.
So thank you so much, everyone. I hope we have been able to answer a lot of queries. If there are still more questions, still more confusions to be cleared, our sales team is always there. You can write into us. Our CEO is very, very responsive on the Twitter. So do reach out to us. We'll be more than happy to take all your questions, answer your queries, and take suggestions. We are a feedback-oriented company. Many of these offerings that we have been talking about or we have come up with has been a direct result of feedback that has come from investors and distributors. We really value your feedback. We may not be able to act upon each and every one of them, but I must tell you that we are a very feedback conscious company. We take it very, very seriously. We are going to come up with a fantastic website. So if you have any issues with regards to our website, please bear with us for some more time. This is also a result of the feedback that has come to us, though we believe that it's a good transactional website, but the aspirations of investors, and we really appreciate it, are that we should be offering a world-class experience to all our stakeholders, and we shall. So thank you so much for tuning in. We really look forward to next session very, very soon. Thank you so much.
And from our entire team, because we're not going to meet you in 2020, I think we wish you a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year from the entire Edelweiss Asset Management team. Thank you for the tremendous support in 2020, and we'll come back in 2021.
See you in 2021.